Disturbing. A word that causes certain emotions to arise within us. Anxiety, worry, concern. What we consider disturbing may differ from person to person, but there are some things that pretty much everyone can agree on. While looking for stories to put in this video, I was searching subreddits when I came across a story that I found truly sickening. One that has been told before, but somehow I hadn't heard of. This was the story of the brutal murder of Kelly Ann Bates. In 1993, Kelly Ann Bates was a 14-year-old girl in Manchester, England. She was in high school and was described as a sporty, outgoing girl. She had a great relationship with her brothers and was said to have given them the best of her in life. One day, she was walking home from babysitting for one of her friends when she would meet a man in his mid-40s named James Patterson Smith. He claimed that he walked her home safely that day, but little did Kelly know James had a rather violent past. In 1980, James had abused his then wife, who then divorced him. He then started a relationship with a 20-year-old woman named Tina Watson, whom for 2 years was used as a human punching bag while being pregnant with his child. She escaped from him with their child one night after he attempted to drown her while in the bathtub. He then started grooming 15-year-old Wendy Motorshed. He again was very abusive towards her, even once holding her head underwater in the kitchen sink in an attempt to drown her. All of these flings seemed to have ended before things got worse. That brings us back to Kelly. After he met Kelly, he began to groom her as well. And 2 years after initially meeting with James, slowly but noticeably, Kelly Ann began disappearing for nights from her home. She became more withdrawn. Her mother, Margaret Bates, states that when she first met James, she could tell something was off, stating that the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She tried everything she could to get Kelly Ann away from him. Kelly's parents would start to notice bruises on her, and when asked, she would just play it off as an accident and not to worry about it. They decided to call the authorities, but due to her being 17, which is the legal age of consent in the UK, they couldn't do much of anything. James eventually convinced Kelly to move into his home on Furnival Road towards the end of 1995, never to see her parents again. Kelly would give her parents calls pretty frequently at first, but the longer she stayed with James, the more infrequent those calls would be. In December of 1995, Kelly quit her part-time job, and soon after, she would stop contacting her family altogether. Kelly's family started receiving cards from her on birthdays and anniversaries, but the handwriting on these cards wasn't hers. Rather, it was James sending these on her behalf. Noticing that something was very weird, one of Kelly's brothers went to James' house to check up on her, only to be told she wasn't home. Sometime later, a concerned neighbor asked how Kelly was doing, but was only allowed to see her through the upstairs window. The last time her parents would hear from her is a phone call on March 10th, 1996. A little over a month later, on April 16th, James Smith would walk into a local police station and tell them with an eerie calmness, "Kelly has been drowned in the bath." What police would find when they got to the house would be nothing less of terrifying. The timeline of her death is blurred, as the only thing they had to go off of were her extensive injuries. As we all know, the abuse started towards the beginning of the relationship, but the majority of the torturing seemed to be carried out over the span of 4 weeks. There was blood found in every room of the house, and Kelly's body was found to have over 150 different injuries. She had scalding to her buttocks and left leg, likely caused by boiling hot water. Burns on her thigh caused by a hot clothing iron. A fractured arm. Multiple stab wounds from knives, forks, and scissors to her legs, torso, and the inside of her mouth. Her hands and feet were crushed, leaving her unable to use a phone to dial for help. Her ears, nose, eyebrows, mouth, lips, and genitalia were mutilated. Deep wounds were caused by a spade and pruning shears. She was partially scalped. And what was probably the worst of all the injuries is both of her eyes were gouged out. We don't know when this was done, but the coroner said that it happened no less than 5 days and no more than 5 weeks before her death. Not only that, but after they had been gouged out, Smith would stab her empty eye sockets multiple times. One can only imagine being in excruciating pain while also not being able to see what horrible torture method was coming next. On the day of her death, she was dragged into the bathtub, where Smith would beat her unconscious with the shower head, and she would be drowned shortly after. During all of this, she had lost a total of 44 pounds, and she hadn't been given water for several days before her death. The horrors she went through during the last month are incomprehensible. Smith was immediately taken into custody, and when Margaret Bates found out what had happened, she knew he had killed her. Smith pleaded not guilty, stating that Kelly put me through hell, and he was egged on by her, and that the injuries Kelly had sustained was of her own doing. He claimed that he gouged her eyes out because she had dared him to. Peter Openshaw from the prosecution team said, "It was as if he deliberately disfigured her, causing her the utmost pain, distress, and degradation. The injuries were not the result of one sudden eruption of violence. They must have been caused over a long period and were so extensive and so terrible that the defendant must have deliberately and systematically tortured the girl." A consultant psychiatrist, Gillian Mazzei, told the court that Smith had a severe paranoid disorder with morbid jealousy and lived in a distorted reality. It took the jury less than an hour to find James Smith guilty and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. The pictures of Kelly's body shown during the trial were so disturbing that the whole jury was offered psychiatric counseling, which every single member accepted. The paranormal and unexplained seem to be what scares people the most. But what this story proves is how another human being, just like you and me, can be just as scary. In March of 2015, a Craigslist ad was posted in the Boulder, Colorado area. The poster described wanting to sell maternity clothes for free, as she had grown out of them. Michelle Wilkins, a 26-year-old woman, responded to the ad, as she was 7 months pregnant and thought, why not? She started to text back and forth with the poster, just small talk, and eventually coordinating times when Michelle should come over to the poster's house to receive the clothes. And on March 18th, Michelle would arrive at the poster's house. The decision, however, would change her life forever.
Longmont 911, address of your emergency.
1620 Green Place.
1620 what?
Green Place.
I can't understand the street.
Green Place.
Green Place. Green like the color?
Yeah.
What's the phone number you're calling me from? Okay, tell me what happened.
She cut me.
Who cut you?
Downstairs. I don't know.
Okay, hold on.
I responded to.
Hang on.
Craigslist.
Hold on.
Please. I'm downstairs.
Okay, who cut you?
This girl I responded to was ready for Jack.
What did she cut you with?
A knife. I'm pregnant. She got me in my stomach. I'm afraid.
She cut you in your stomach?
I'm pregnant.
Okay. What is the suspect's name?
I don't remember.
What you just heard was Michelle calling the ambulance. Upon entering the home, Michelle would meet Dynell Lane, a 34-year-old woman. Dynell was the nurse aide, and in 2014, she would tell her husband, David Ridley, that she was pregnant. Even though David didn't want any more children, as he had a daughter, and Dynell had 2 daughters of her own, he was excited to be a dad again. Dynell told David and their family that it would be a boy and would post pictures of her baby bump online, as well as ultrasound pictures. Her friends even gave her a baby shower, and everything seemed to be going well. Except they weren't well. And things started to seem off to David. Every time Dynell would have a prenatal appointment for the baby, she would always find reasons to either not take him or something would come up and they couldn't go entirely. He started to become suspicious that she was even pregnant at all, and told Dynell that if she didn't prove that she was pregnant or tell him what was going on, her and her daughter would have to move out of his house. Later, Dynell would post a Craigslist ad selling maternity clothes, describing that the clothes were too small and that she needed to get rid of them. And that's when Michelle would respond. Upon entering Dynell's home, Michelle and Dynell would have a lengthy conversation. Dynell went on and on about her life story, about her pregnancy, and basically everything about herself. Michelle figured she was just lonely, so she was polite and listened. Michelle also shared that she was having a baby girl, and that her name was going to be Aurora. After an hour or so, Michelle mentioned that she really needed to get going, so Dynell gave her the maternity clothes that she had came for. As she was walking to the door, Dynell mentioned that there had been some baby clothes in the laundry room in the basement. Michelle, having already had a baby shower, but decided to be polite, agreed to go down there with Dynell. Once downstairs and after seeing the clothes, she insisted she was fine and needed to get going. Dynell would then attack Michelle, hitting her in the head and trying to strangle her. Michelle was confused. "Why are you doing this to me?" she asked, as she watched Dynell try to strangle her. Dynell was struggling, and Michelle obviously wasn't going to go down without a fight. So Dynell managed to get Michelle in her daughter's room. Once in there, she smashed her head with a lava lamp. Still conscious, Michelle was still trying to fight, so Dynell took one of the broken glass pieces from the lava lamp and stabbed her in the neck. This still wasn't enough, and Michelle was still fighting. Dynell, in a last-ditch effort, jumped on top of her and put all of her weight down onto her windpipe, causing Michelle to go unconscious. Dynell wasn't pregnant at all. She made it all up, and was trying to keep the lie going as she had a prenatal appointment scheduled later that day. And what Dynell was about to do was going to help her continue the story she had fabricated. She had prepared 2 kitchen knives. She then cut into Michelle's abdomen, performing a C-section. Once she got the baby out, she took the baby upstairs into the bathroom. It was around this time that David was on his way home from work to take Dynell to this appointment. He tries to call Dynell and gets no answer. Dynell needs time, so eventually she answers and tells David to run to the school to fill out some paperwork for their daughters before coming home. He agrees, and Dynell has more time to clean up the mess she had just made. When David finally gets home, he finds his wife covered in blood looking in the bathtub. She was looking at the baby who was floating face down in the water-filled bathtub and calmly told him she had a miscarriage. David, extremely upset by this, grabs the lifeless baby and takes them both to the hospital. When they get there, she acts completely distraught, saying that her baby needs help and it needs to be saved. But once it is confirmed that the baby didn't make it, she becomes super calm, almost as if a weight has been lifted from her shoulders. Doctors allowed them to mourn as David was holding the dead baby in his hand, pacing across the room. But eventually, the doctor said they needed to examine Dinell to make sure nothing else was wrong. She at first denied the exam, but with pressure from her husband, she agreed. There were no signs of her ever being pregnant at all. The doctors knew something was seriously wrong here, and the authorities were then called. Dinell tried to lie herself out of this by making up a story that a pregnant girl had threatened her at knife point, and she had to defend herself, took the knife and stabbed the girl, but she didn't want anything to happen to the baby, so she removed it. Cops not buying this story, they arrested her at the hospital. Meanwhile, Michelle, still in a pool of blood in Dinell's basement, regains consciousness. She is barely alive, but she is able to find a phone which she uses to call 911, which is the audio you heard earlier. The EMTs were able to get her to the hospital and rushed her into emergency surgery. She was able to make a recovery. Eventually, Dinell came clean about the fake pregnancy, even revealing that she got her tubes tied in 2002, which also happens to be the year that Dinell lost her 19-month baby to drowning in the pond. During the trial, Dinell seemed very unaffected by the whole situation. This was a planned attack, as she even looked up how to perform a C-section days prior. Dinell never tried to send help to Michelle even after she had been arrested while at the hospital. She never apologized for what she did, and her family had to apologize on her behalf. Dinell was sentenced to 100 years in prison for the murder of Aurora Wilkins. Dinell was a disturbed individual, and her motives that day were very unclear, whether it was this giant tangle of lies she got herself stuck in, or she did not want to lose her boyfriend. No matter what the reason, it did not warrant what Michelle and her family had to go through. This next story isn't really disturbing, but I decided to throw it in there because of how sad and bleak our reality can be. It was a late, clear August night in the city of Atlanta in 2018. Beverly Jenkins, a resident services advocate for a charity organization, was leaving her job when she decided to pull over and get some gas. She only had a 10-minute drive back to her home, and everything was going exactly like every other night, except that was about to change. Beverly never made it home that night. At around 12:30 a.m., police got a call about shots fired, and eventually they found Beverly's body in her car at the intersection of Westview Drive and Hopkins Street. The very car her nonprofit gave to her so she wouldn't have to take public transportation late at night. She had appeared to be shot in the head. Police had no clue who could have done this. Beverly was a 49-year-old woman married to her high school sweetheart. She was a mother of 5 and a grandmother. Who would have thought to have killed her? Police's initial conclusion was that this had to be a failed carjacking, and she was likely not targeted specifically. They found one bullet casing at the scene, but that is all they had to go off of. Surveillance video was turned into the police that showed 4 men walking down Westview Drive minutes before she was killed. The video was released to the public in hopes of finding any leads, but they wouldn't have to wait too long to get some answers. On September 17th at 1:15 a.m., there was another carjacking that left the victim with 2 bullet wounds. Luckily, she was able to make it to the hospital in time. The police collected 2 shell casings and immediately linked them to the Beverly Jenkins murder. This was the break in the case they needed, as they were able to link Khalid Bays and Adarius Jones to both the murder and carjacking. They put out to the public the make and the model of the car and the names of the 2 suspects they believe had committed these crimes. Again, they didn't have to wait long, as just a day later, a patrol officer spotted the stolen car driving. He tries to pull over the car, but they fled, leading to a chase. This chase ultimately ends in a wreck at a nearby basketball court. Jones was arrested near the wreckage, but Bays was nowhere to be found. Days went by, and there were no signs of Bays. Police released a statement to the public that Khalid Bays was on the run and that his level of violence is unusual among offenders. Again, police got lucky as Bays would turn himself in on September 21st. Both Bays and Jones would plead guilty to all charges, and they would both get life sentences. Beverly was a beacon of hope for single mothers, as she worked for a non-profit organization that helped single mothers and single women find places to live. She lit up every room she walked into, her colleague stated. She was an advocate for peace, and her family now has to go on with their lives without her. This is just a testament that you never know when you will see someone for the last time. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, as the first two were pretty disturbing. I threw in the third one because that actually happens to be one of my aunts, and I hadn't seen a lot of true crime YouTubers talking about her story, and I felt like her story needed to be told. So I hope that was okay with you guys. If you guys enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe, as I will make more videos like this. This is my first time doing any type of true crime and even scripting my videos. So if you have any feedback, please let me know. And until next time.